motion to approve the plan so that the team can go back and simply polishing the plan for a final product so that it can be published by December 30th. Currently, our goal is shooting for to be published on December 28th, so that it gives a little bit of a wiggle room in case things don't go well, or the fact that if we are able to hit December 28th, then our collective team and the council member can cite a bit of a relief right before the new year, and then get a day or two of a well-deserved rest. As I mentioned earlier, this team has been drafting and updating and editing and incorporating all of the inputs just around the clock. I'm very, very appreciative of their effort. And then I'm trying to think of anything. I believe that's pretty much it. I wanted to see if the council member are okay with that type of schedule modification today. Yep, most nodding head, taking that's good. So with that, Stephanie, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, and good morning, everyone. Today is definitely a great day. I am excited, of course, to be and to have this final council meeting, as Amy said, possibly our final council meeting, to really talk about, of course, the work that we've done around the Broadband for All Action Plan. First, I would, of course, have to thank you, the council members, the designees, for your collaboration, for your feedback, for your input, for your advisement. Truly appreciate your support, and it truly took the collaboration of this entire group within the council to make this happen, so we appreciate it. I also wanted to share with you, of course, where we've come from since the last time we met. It's been a few weeks, feels like maybe months, but it's been only a few weeks since we last met. And in summary of the feedback that we've been conducting, we continue to receive submitted written comments. And ultimately, of course, with the collective feedback from the community, from the tribes, from local government providers, we have to create this action plan. And I know we've talked about it before, but it's worth mentioning again, from 14 feedback events, about 600 plus attendees.
Hey, Stephanie, sorry to interrupt. I think your broadband connection is really bad. So maybe either turn off the video, or if you are sharing something, we're not seeing it.
Okay, is that better? Hopefully?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Great. In any event, my update is quick. I did just want to thank you. I did just want to share, of course, made tremendous effort to collect feedback from the community. I'm very happy to report that we've collected feedback from several tribal communities, River Tribe, the Europe Tribe. Thank you to Christina Snyder. So I'm very proud of the feedback that we've collected from the community to be able to create this report. Also, I wanted to share, we've been ongoing with specific details that we've added to this plan as a result of your feedback, whether from the council or, of course, the stakeholders. Some of that feedback in particular that you will see or have seen, of course, in this final draft is around the additional content, of course, acknowledging the recent efforts, acknowledging that the state of California, of course, has been working on closing the digital divide, but now we are renewing efforts. We also have, of course, additional data and information around connectivity and internet usage by demographics. We've also, of course, have additional information, again, based on feedback to clarify the state's approach around broadband performance standards. We took a look, of course, at the numbers that are necessary, of course, to utilize high-speed internet, whether it be within a family or a business. And we wanted to make sure that the speeds were appropriate and more than adequate for the state of California. And we'll go into that more. And of course, we also took a look closely at all of the actions, the 23 actions in the broadband plan, and we're specific around housing. And we're specific on certain areas that were very important, of course, to the state of California. So we just wanted to share and make sure that you knew, as Amy said, we have spent many days and many nights making sure that this is the right stake in the ground for the state of California. I wanted to close by sharing a little bit about the feedback that I've received from all of you, and I hope you can still hear me okay. Some words that, of course, that come to mind regarding this plan as a result of the feedback that we've gathered, as a result of the collaborative effort for this Broadband for All Action Plan. One, thank you to those who have shared. They feel that it's the right balance. We have the right balance as far as this first action plan, because of course, moving forward, we can review and update this plan in subsequent years on an annual basis. Inclusion, as I've mentioned, and we did want to stress, because we put tremendous effort to make sure that we heard all of you, whether through one-on-one meetings, listening sessions, or even working sessions. And a foundation. The plan is meant, of course, to provide a solid foundation, not only for the state, but for local government, for, of course, other state agencies to make sure we can carry on and carry forward to make sure that we are prioritizing resources for the digital divide. And of course, lastly, pace. We are at an accelerated pace, not just because of COVID, because that is what the state deserves. That is what the citizens deserve as we help close the digital divide. And as you can see, creating this plan within 3 to 4 months is definitely at an accelerated pace, and the pace that we want to keep moving into 2021. Thank you again so much to everyone for your help. Please, of course, reach out to our office ongoing as we move into the next year, but I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. I just want to say thank you, and I want to say happy holidays.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, sorry we couldn't see you on the screen, and while we're gonna hand this off to Justin to walk through, if you want, maybe call in from the phone and we can have your screen on. So I think today we really wanted to make this celebratory if we can get through this report. So it will be great to have everybody on screen. Okay, all right, Justin, you're up.
All right, with that, I will share my screen. All right, everyone see my screen? Looks like a yes. All right, well, to reiterate the point that Stephanie and Amy made, I also want to express a note of appreciation for all of the wonderful feedback we've received over the past several months and support in all of the editing and revisions that we've been doing. The way that I'm going to go through this is I'll go section by section and try to hit the high points are either different or notable, and then pause at the end of a section for any questions or any comments or things that are sort of fatal flaws that we want to make sure are addressed. And then when we get to the end of the report, we'll then open it up for public comment. All right. Okay, so the first section is really just the executive summary, where we hit the high points around why broadband's critical, how COVID has shown more of a spotlight on this, and how that's framed the context behind the action plan, the process that we've used to be able to develop this, including the engagement and the research that's gone into the plan, then highlighting 3 long-term goals. Making sure that all Californians have high-performance broadband available at home, schools, libraries, and businesses. Making sure that they have access to affordable broadband and the devices necessary, and that can access training and support to enable digital inclusion. And then we highlight the high-level set of tools and actions that we propose to take heading into the new year. And then go deeper into the fact that this is going to take some time, and it's going to require partnerships and support, not just from the state, but also from our federal and local partners, from the private sector, from the tribes, to be able to achieve a very ambitious agenda ahead of us. And then we wanted to really end on a note of acknowledging and appreciation of how this community has come together to collaborate in response to COVID-19, and acknowledge all of the work that we've done both through the governor's task force and the superintendent's task force, but then also the additional work that the provider community and the rest of our partners have done to step up and help us meet this moment. that's how we frame the executive summary. Pause there for a second just to see if there are any questions or comments on exec sum.
I would go through maybe Justin, the whole thing, so we can come
Perfect.
back. Scroll slowly.
Oh, did you mean just the executive summary?
No. I mean just all the sections. So finish the whole doc, but scroll
Okay.
slowly, or we're getting a whiplash right now.
The next section, we talk about why broadband for all Californians is important. And as we talked about last time, really trying to hook ourselves with the specifics of the individual experience across a number, like, a representative but not comprehensive sample of the ways in which broadband is critical to life. This is, we acknowledge that this is not the idea of ensuring access to broadband for all Californians is not new. This is something that policymakers have been talking about for a long time. And this is something that is a increasingly urgent piece of work, given that broadband access is no longer a newfangled part of life, but really a critical service. And it is intertwined with both the work that individuals do, a lot of the critical services that the state provides, as well as helping to frame our competitiveness internationally and nationally. The actual adoption of broadband has been uneven, and COVID exacerbated this to some extent. And so as we think about the economic opportunity in a post-pandemic world, the efforts around rebuilding can really be supported by increasing broadband access. And so this is an opportunity to think about the way that we drive economic development throughout the state, especially for all of us who are working from home today. It really opens up opportunities to think differently about where companies can be located, both established companies having second headquarters in more rural parts of the state, to startups locating in other communities, to people deciding to work in a different place, to live in a different place than their companies are headquartered or organizations are headquartered. The overview of the current state of broadband today, it's complicated in California because we are so big, and regions and local communities vary, both in terms of their geography, their demography, the level of competition and investment. And so when you think about the when you think about the ways in which broadband has helped to encourage the development of the state over time, you'll know we still have portions of the state and of our community that remain unserved and under-adopted in the state today. And so when you think about the good news is that about 95% of households in California have access to pretty high-speed broadband, reflecting cable and fiber deployment in urban population centers. That sure doesn't look nearly as rosy when you look to rural areas. And so part of this, framing the magnitude of this challenge is that California is incredibly large. And so the portion of California that has the majority of our population is relatively small, whereas the portion of our state, our geography, that has the remaining 5% of the population is really large, and compares in a quite dramatic fashion to other states. And so when you look at this across the different categories, one of the things that you see, and this goes to the broader equity point, is that if you have an income of over $100,000 a year, there's almost universal adoption of broadband. If you jump down to the poorest Californians, it's cut about in half. And so it's obviously a reflection of poverty, but it also exacerbates the underlying potential impacts that broadband access can have on people's lives and livelihoods. There's a set of challenges we tee up. Primarily talking about speed and reliability, ability, access to devices, digital skills, and data. Availability, the need for performance broad continues to increase. And so if you go back to broadband, it was 200 kilobits per second. And that has just dramatically changed over the course of the last 25 years in terms of what the internet's capable of doing and how people use it. California's current standard is slower than the FCC's definition. And there's very little chance that as we look towards the future that we're going to need less broadband. We cite a number of facts to help support that, including the fact that, you know, back in 2018, the FCC's Measuring Broadband America report found that 92 megabits per second controlled the federal standard. And so we see there are a lot of really strong speeds across the state and across the country and across the globe. And so making sure that we're investing ahead of that is something that's important and that we need to be thoughtful and mindful of. The second piece here on availability is that unfortunately not all areas of our state and all communities have access to high performance broadband, and the workers redundancy that are required. And so part of the issue is that having lower band creates missed and quality of life opportunities, but also threats to people's homes. And so Patrick was quite passionate about this in earlier California Broadband Council meeting. Given the fact that climate change is continuing to make our wildfire seasons worse, this is something that is a critical matter for emergencies as well as for economic development. When it comes to tribes, it's a similar picture to rural areas. They have less robust services than their urban counterparts. And so there's a clear pattern of underinvestment and exacerbation of existing inequities there. Part of this is due to the economics of infrastructure deployment, which is precisely why we have programs like CASIF. As we think about the ways in which we want to create incentives going forward, there's some things to note. One is, of course, that there's no obligation once a provider pulls out in that area that they will continue to provide internet access, even if it's the only provider in a community. And so we need to be thoughtful about making sure that we're providing that kind of lifeline to the rural parts of our state. Also, there's an important barrier to entry for new internet service providers in parts of California. And so this requires thinking about collaboration and new models to help lower those barriers to entry, and thinking about things like permitting and building across jurisdictions to be able to help increase our deployment, particularly in these areas that have seen historic underinvestment. Lastly, and I might actually call on you, Rob, to offer a little bit of context here, because I don't think the entirety of the council has had the benefit of learning about this yet. But the CPUC commissioned a model to help estimate the need of what it would cost if we were to provide gigabit service to unserved and underserved Californians. And the way that this model was constructed was very much looking at different definitions of unserved in the state, and then thinking about, okay, what's the cost of deploying fiber, both the middle mile fiber networks as well as the last mile fiber networks to the areas that don't meet that unserved threshold. I don't know, Rob, if you wanted to offer any more context setting behind this modeling.
Yes, thank you, Justin. And you're correct. So the version of the action plan we're looking at today has more information on the California broadband cost model. So we commissioned this model from national experts, CostQuest Associates. It's an engineering-based model, meaning that the model builds example network infrastructure to service all the unserved locations. And unserved, we've got different versions of what unserved means. So we have a 25 megabits per second down and 3 up or below or sorry, anything below that would be considered unserved for one run. We have another run, when I say run, I mean estimate, that is 100 down and 10 up, and then a third estimate using just 100 down, not looking at any upload speed. And as the action plan states, the estimates vary between 5.6 billion for the 25.3 up to 6.7 for just the 100 down. And actually, interestingly, the 100 down, 10 up combination is slightly higher because we're specifying an upload speed, and that can definitely have play a role in the cost. Just a couple more notes on this. The model calculates the cost of the example network, so it looks at extending broadband infrastructure from cable head ends and telephone companies' central offices when the existing infrastructure is available. So this is what we call a brownfield build. So it's just basically extending it beyond the existing service area. When network infrastructure is not available to be extended, the model estimates new infrastructure being built from scratch. That's called greenfield. And then the model is estimating the cost of a fiber optic network to homes and small businesses. To account for the last mile technologies, the model's estimating which network elements are needed for the FCC's high cost and extremely high cost areas, and which network elements are not required for the high cost and extremely high cost areas. And then finally, the model can use different technologies. So I know I mentioned fiber optic, but given the time and resource constraints, and just for simplicity's sake, we use just a fiber model for now, because fiber represents the highest quality, most durable, longest lasting infrastructure, has low maintenance and low maintenance and low upgrade costs. And then essentially all technologies eventually connect to fiber anyway. So that's another reason why we just went with the fiber only model. And we've got a website up that goes into more details of the cost model for people who are interested.
Thanks, Rob. Before I continue, does anyone have questions on the cost model itself? Council?
Justin, I do, if I might.
Sure.
Rob, I want a clarification. The estimates were to 98% or 100%, and then were they to all tribal lands and all residences on tribal lands?
So it's to 100%.
Good.
And it includes tribal lands as well. And I think as we get into further discussions and further iterations, if we're able to do that with this cost model, we would look at variations, using substitution analysis, where we take out one technology and put in another for instance, in extremely high cost areas where you have very low density. So just as a starting point, we went with a fiber only model.
And can I ask one more clarification on the fiber only? That is also to the premise. We absolutely have to have fiber for any backhaul of any other technologies or all the technologies we understand today. But this was fiber to all locations. Is that right?
That's correct, Sunny. But as I said, the caveat here is the unserved threshold. So we're not deploying fiber to places that already have 25.3 or that already have 100 down, 10 up.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Danielle Hughes from the Tahoe Transportation District up in Lake Tahoe. I just would like to comment that.
Thank you. We're not currently in public comment.
Questions.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we're still in the council session, and we're going to open it up to public comment once we get through the doc.
My apologies. Thank you.
No, that's quite okay. Thank you, Danielle. Any other questions from council members on the model before we continue? Okay, hearing none. But the one other piece that I would highlight just with the $6.8 billion is that part of the reason why we wanted to include this in this conversation was to help sort of illustrate the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us. Because as we think about the money that California is expected to get through RDOF and has allocated in our existing programs, we're still at currently a fraction of this to date. And so there's a big challenge ahead on that side as well. The second piece, affordability. So we've talked a bunch about this in prior meetings. Price matters. And so it's not just the price of the service itself, it's also everything to do with actually providing access. So taxes, surcharges, rental charges, the cost of devices. These things might be small if you have means, but they can be quite substantial if you are poorer. And so when we think about affordability, this is, affordability is a driver of adoption. It's also something that we need to think about in the context of the way in which we are providing broadband compared to other countries. And so in other parts of the world, broadband in the US is very expensive. And so it's strikingly that, across the OECD, only Mexico has higher broadband prices than the US. And so if you're a family who has a tight budget, it's harder to incorporate broadband into the basket of goods that you're paying for on a regular basis than if you were in another part of the world. When you think about poorer Californians, a lot of people will rely on phone service only. It has limitations of its own because it makes it harder to share with others in your household. And there's more limited functionality that you can provide on your phone than you can if you are on a computer in terms of, your ability to do things like search for jobs and actually develop content. It's a lot harder from your phone. And so when you sort of look at it from the perspective of the actual consumer, a lot of non-adopters really just can't afford market prices. And so there's a fundamental mismatch between the price available and what their ability to pay is. And the affordable programs that we have today don't currently meet that, either in terms of their capacity or in terms of their coverage. And then the last point here that we talk about is the relationship between competition and pricing. And so it's clear that with more competition, price goes down. And we cite some reports around that. And when you look across the state today, there are, especially at the sort of the higher thresholds, the higher speed thresholds, there are much fewer parts of the state that have access, or people have access to multiple providers at those higher speeds. And so that helps drive up costs for consumers. And so that's something that we wanted to make sure we called out and we're cognizant of. Third point here on devices as a challenge. I think I already actually walked through some of this with smartphones. Part of the reason devices are important is that they don't have, that having access to a computer makes it easier to make sure that you're getting the full value out of a broadband connection. And it exacerbates the affordability problem. As you see here, if you look at internet connectivity for Californian households with smartphone only, you see some of the ways in which this shows up as an inequity across our population. And it correlates quite highly with some demographic groups as well as with education and income. So it's something that we want to be really thoughtful about going forward to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity to avail themselves of the opportunities that broadband provides. We also note, even though we're in COVID times, that not everyone's ultimately going to have access to a desktop or laptop at home. And that's why our broader community institutions are important and accessibility there matters. And that's both, libraries, nonprofits, schools. Fourth challenge here, digital skills. Digital literacy is a spectrum, but the way both the needs for digital literacy will increase over the course of your lifetime. The needs of it have also changed dramatically and evolved dramatically over each of our lifetimes, just to say it continues to grow. So thinking about broadband adoption, at a base level means ensuring that people have the introductory skills to be able to use the internet. then we need to think about actually building from there. And so there's some interesting studies here about how even engaging in basic training increases the likelihood that people will use internet for learning, job searching, and improving job skills. And so it just helps increase the point that if we believe that broadband is important for economic development and pro-social reasons, training is an important piece of that puzzle. That also needs to include late adopters. So our seniors who require those introductory skills as well. It's not just folks that might have missed out in the educational pipeline or based on income. The last challenge that we highlight is data. And so one of the notable things with data is that we're still missing a lot of it from a policy perspective. And so we've talked about this a lot as a council. And there are a set of problems here around granularity and accuracy of the data that we have in terms of our deployment. There's some of it that is just not clear enough around availability and adoption. And we've talked about ways that we can potentially triangulate that, but we don't have that at a state level in a way that could help us better inform our policy today. And then on the subscription data itself, the data is not an end in itself. The reason why we care about data is to help inform the way that we do our work as a state to be able to drive towards broadband for all more effectively and accurately. And we know that it's going to be a continued challenge to help optimize the work that we do going ahead to continue to improve the data that we have available to ourselves. So given that I just spent about 20 minutes talking through the challenges and the upfront, I'm going to pause there quickly before I go into actions for any questions or places that we want to jump back to as a council before we go on to the actions.
Yes, it's okay. Let's keep moving.
All right.
Welcome back.
So we highlight the 3 goals, which I provided an overview of earlier. And then the action plan is organized around those goals. And so we recognize that any of the actions that we need to take are going to be grounded in partnerships because these are not things we can do by ourselves. And some of these are things that we will get started in 2021, but not finish, where others we're going to be able to sort of move further in the completion journey in that time frame. The action plan will also be something that we update on an annual basis. So this will be truly a living document that we are executing against and learning from and evolving over time, especially as our federal landscape changes. We want to make sure that we're both, shaping this to help position California well in the context of a new administration and a potential sort of additional focus in broadband in the new year and in the new administration, but also thinking about ways in which we can continue to be dynamic and adaptable as future opportunities arise. With that said, the first set of actions is around ensuring that all Californians have broadband available. There are a couple of sort of broad categories within this, categories of actions. The first is modernizing our broadband speed and performance standards. And so this is adjusting our definitions to adjust the baseline definition to match the FCC standard of 25.3, as well as a goal of 120 that reflects the governor's executive order around a minimum of 100 megabits per second download, but also the growing demand that we've seen for higher upload speeds. And those dual definitions would bring the state in alignment with federal standards and adopt a forward-looking view for what broadband demand will look like in the future. The second piece is that it's around the way in which we evaluate broadband service and talking about broadband at a serviceable location level to give us more accuracy and granularity. Unserved and underserved are elements that we also want to evaluate in the context of funding opportunities to ensure that we are leveraging our state resources to maximize federal resources. And then the other piece that we highlight here is that we need to be able to reevaluate these things on an annual basis. One of the things that we've talked about again and again, and we were talking about as we were looking back at the 1996 FCC standards, is that demand changes, supply changes, and we don't want to be stuck with something that was put into legislation years ago. We want to be adaptable and reflect the changing realities on the ground. And that's particularly true in the context of changes at a federal level to ensure that we're continuing to stay on track. The fourth bit here in modernizing standards is around criteria for state funding around demonstrated local and tribal government involvement. And so that's about making sure that we've got that, we have sort of coalesced partners around the demands for support for deployment. And then lastly, prioritizing funding for open access middle mile infrastructure, including connections to anchor institutions. And this reflects the need to be able to try to decrease some barriers to investment, particularly in underserved areas in the state. The second piece around modernizing our standards is about looking at additional financing opportunities with government and philanthropic partners. So we talked about the $6.8 billion number earlier in the context of the cost model. This is going to mean that we're going to need to be even more creative about how we think about financial instruments and opportunities going forward. Third is modernizing our universal service programs to effectively support the deployment and maintenance of broadband networks. And then we've got a couple of things that are worth further consideration, but we don't have discrete actions about at the time. So thinking about how we expand the pie of dollars to drive additional availability and establish obligations to serve customers within areas. I am going to keep going through all of the actions within Goal 1, and then I will come back and then I'll pause for questions because I know that there's a lot here. Second area, simplifying processes and leveraging existing assets to improve construction. First, implement the Dig Smart policy, and this might be something that Lori wants to touch on after we go through here. But this is an opportunity to lower the cost of infrastructure deployment. Second is improve state encroachment permitting processes and rights of way. This is something we heard repeatedly from our provider partners, and we're particularly interested in accelerating that in unserved and underconnected communities. The third piece is explore additional actions to enhance permitting processes through meaningful partnerships. And so this is partially, a context of convening to make sure that we're sharing best practices across the state and working with our federal partners to support the prioritization of permits in the context of federal land. And then the last two within this bucket are identifying state property for potential use for broadband infrastructure, as well as coordinating convening jurisdictions that are implementing next generation 911 to expand broadband infrastructure to enhance public safety. And then the last piece within the goal around availability are setting reliability standards. And so something that we've talked about before is that reliability is important in the context of public safety and emergency response. And we want to establish standards for middle mile and backhaul resilience and reliability to ensure that we don't repeat the experience that we've had in our most recent wildfires. So with that, I will pause for questions and comments from council members on the actions in this first section.
Hey, Justin, this is Jerry. One of the concerns we had was just the structure of the word responsible. We were hoping to change that to key parties. Well, and the reason for that is we don't want people to look through this and say, well, my name's not under responsible, skip to the next section.
Got it. Yeah, I think that there's a, I'm interested what other council members think on this, because on the one hand, I know that we heard that feedback in terms of ensuring that we're sort of encouraging a wider tent and bringing people into the process. On the other hand, there was a desire to ensure that it was clear who was going to do the work, and that there was sort of sufficient clarity about drivers within this process.
Is it not possible to say responsible parties in consultation with key stakeholders?
I'm not sure we can get that through our legal.
Can you enlighten me what would be wrong with that?
I think what they're concerned about is the fact that you know, the CDE is a constitutional agency, and so responsible would mean if we don't live up to whatever issues or concerns are in this, what are the consequences? And that's their main concern.
Can I ask a question, Jerry? I'm guessing that after the new year, you know, we're going to be, once we adopt this action plan, we're going to need to be coming together and putting in, right, specific kind of, right, actions under these, because some of these are very big, right? So if it kind of had the language you were looking for, and then in, you know, when we all come together, because you know, maybe there's some that have CDT and the CPUC, right? And then they would hammer out who's going to do what in terms of actions. Would something like that work for CDE? So y'all are listed, and then the actions everyone is going to you know, the specific things that are going to be done, and when, you know, as that plan emerges, you know, then you guys are, you know, listed there, and it's, you know, kind of more in that working session kind of way.
And that makes sense, Anne. I think for us, it's just a matter of, we want to participate. There are actions that are going to be taken. We are definitely 100% in and on board with this. I just want to make sure that I can get past my legal folks. And if changing responsible to key parties does it, you know, that's all it takes, then I'd love to see that happen.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that a little bit. You know, Jerry, I think this is, you know, even though we all here, you know, represent the respective department, the Broadband Council itself is a public entity. So I think, you know, for example, the quote unquote approval of this report today, it is really in the seat of our public entity, like, you know, with this open working process. So I just want to make sure from a process aspect, you know, similar to what Anne was talking about, right? There's this umbrella plan of what the aspiration goal and things that objective that are set up. And then next year, there's the implementation of the plan, which I think at that point, you know, there's more of a, maybe the responsible party versus the collaboration party. You know, we can probably get into more of that, but just, I don't know if that context would help in looking at the verbiage that are used in this broader plan, is that we are all here, even though we represent a department, but we are serving in a public drafting, you know, body. So if the council member gets to a quorum to approve this plan, I mean, that's kind of how we're going to move forward with the adoption of such plan.
And I agree, Amy. I'm, you know, we're looking forward to working with all of the different agencies on this. I just want to make sure that you know, it's basically twofold. As I stated originally, I want to make sure that it's not just the few that are listed that are responsible, and what's the agencies that are listed for each of these are key players. But there are others that will also participate, collaborate, work with, etc. So, I mean, I don't want to get too much into wordsmithing, but I would like to just convey that that's where the CDE is with the wording.
Yeah, maybe key partners and participants or recommended participants or something like that too. So it's not a.
I'm in favor of the key partners. Without it getting too long. I mean, I think it does the trick, which is who are in most cases, the state agencies, many of whom are on the council, or many of which are on the council, but not all. I mean, that makes, I mean, I think that makes sense.
All right. Seems like key partners is the recommendation for the time being. We can come back to that as we vote later. Any other comments on this first section of actions? All right. Jumping to the next one, affordability. The first.
Hey, Justin, sorry to, I just want to make sure I'm mindful of the time. We probably should wrap it up in less than 10 because I want to make sure we have public comment and then the deliberation time by the council member in the next hour.
Perfect. Affordability, the first one is increasing access to affordable broadband services and devices. And so the first action here is within the scope of CPUC's current proceeding, developing a framework to define essential broadband service affordability standards, evaluating those standards relative to other essential services costs. Second is improving the California Lifeline program by including standalone broadband service and encourage participation in that program. Third is leverage existing housing and community development programs to provide free broadband service for tenants in newly built affordable housing. Next is promote existing state contractual vehicles with internet service providers and equipment vendors to support cost savings with local entities, both schools, library districts. Then looking at the needs of our elderly populations to provide access to affordable broadband and identify additional partnership opportunities to meet those needs was something that was called out in the executive order. And then an additional area worth consideration, but we don't have an explicit action on at this time, is ensuring that all of our affordable broadband offers meet the minimum state standards for broadband. Next section within affordability is promoting affordable broadband services and devices. So this is partnering with providers to promote, track, and publicly report on progress of adoption. Both using multi-language marketing materials for distribution to under-adopting communities and using some of our public programs and campaigns to help do that through things like CalFresh and the DMV. Developing tools for individuals and service organizations to identify and subscribe to affordable broadband plans, and then continuing to promote broadband and device offers to recipients of national school lunch programs and library patrons. And then the last element of affordability is competition, where we propose providing guidance to local governments and partner with tribal governments to develop broadband strategies and explore options for increasing competition in their communities. Particularly provide resources for how to inventory local infrastructure assets and publish lease agreements and make assets available on an open access basis. And then there's some additional areas, again, worth consideration, but we don't have explicit actions on at this time. Looking into incentives to encourage competitive leasing of privately owned infrastructure, as well as promoting competition within multi-dwelling units. Given Amy's point on timing, I'm going to push through to the next set of actions as well, and then pause. So this is training and digital inclusion. The first set of actions is around strengthening partnerships and coordinating initiatives. So first, developing a layer and a network of digital inclusion stakeholders to talk about ongoing needs, share resources, and coordinate initiatives. There is a set of cross-cutting actions as well around broadband data and mapping transparency, where we want to collect some more granular data and leverage it to further build out the California Interactive Broadband Map. 2 is use the CPUC's cost model to inform our ongoing state broadband planning and investments, to project our availability based on some of the resources that are coming in, the public resources that are coming in, and inform our discussions about what's going to be required going forward. Establish a portal to make it easier to find information about broadband and serve as a central repository, because there's a lot of things that we've talked about in the context of convening and sharing, and we want to make sure that all of that's coming together in a clear place. And so there are a number of great elements that came up in our outreach that would be included here, including opportunities for the public to submit data to validate or dispute the broadband mapping data. Resources and toolkits around broadband planning and implementation for local governments and organizations and companies, digital inclusion plans, initiatives, and best practices, skills training tools, the information on affordable internet offers and devices, so making that even easier for lower income Californians to be able to find that information, and then information on broadband funding opportunities. The last 2 here are developing and expanding our technical assistance and support. So identifying additional opportunities to provide technical assistance to local governments, tribes, nonprofits, and partners to leverage the resources that we do have available from our federal partners and elsewhere. And this might include navigating some of the technical and regulatory and financial hurdles to be able to access those resources. And lastly, creating a planning group for state agencies that oversee potential infrastructure or adoption funding to make sure that we're aligning our goals and implementation. And I believe the last one, ensuring that, requesting that our executive branch entities and constitutional agencies incorporate broadband into their strategic planning so that we can ensure that as we're thinking forward to initiatives that aren't yet in development, that we're incorporating this work into what we're doing going forward. So I know that's a lot, and I know we want to open it up to public comment shortly, but council members have any additional comments on those actions or questions or clarifications?
Hey, Justin, I'm not sure if the version I have is the same as yours. It looks like on page 24 at the sentence for number 15, it's missing the word state at the end, very bottom of page 24.
It is, Rob, and I flagged it for Stephanie this morning at, I don't know, 6 a.m. or something.
Okay.
Yes, you're right.
Sorry to repeat, thanks.
No, it's good.
There now. Thank you for catching it.
That's a really detailed catch. Good job, you guys. All right.
Rob and I just want to make sure everybody knows we're reading your stuff.
Tremendously grateful for that, Sunny.
You know, Justin, as you were going over these, it made it thinking with Jerry's recommendation in mind. You know, some of these, like there's one that has Department of Technology, but it's obviously very clear that, you know, the PUC would have to be really involved, as well as a number of other agencies, and that kind of brings even more to bear around Jerry's point, and you know, in kind of opening it up a little bit more. So. I don't know, but making it less like it's not just responsible, but it's like this idea of like who are the state entities who are going to have an important role to play in making sure that actually happens, right? And it's got to be all the folks who work on that. So, and I don't mean to add the PUC in there because that's their decision. I just meant more. It made me think that it's a you know, why Jerry's point kind of, it sort of underscores that.
Yeah.
Would there be a comfort factor maybe with wordsmithing this just to say primarily responsible? Like, it just seems like, you know, I get Jerry's point that it's not just the responsibility of one department, but I think the intent of putting that language is someone has to lead it. And so I still think there needs to be a sense of ownership, but it doesn't have to be complete ownership.
What about just using the word lead, like lead entity, because that kind of shows who is, you know, broadly responsible, but that they're not going to accomplish this on their own. And that way you also don't have to go through and try to list every single entity that you can think of.
Exactly. I think that was my concern, because this list is probably going to fluctuate depending on once we get into more concrete of it. And, you know, there's going to be, just like here, there's already departments that are listed that are not part of the council. So I think maybe, you know, a primary responsible, lead responsible, recommended stakeholder or something like that, just to keep it fairly fluid. But the accountability, like at the minimum, these entities should be involved. I think that's the spirit, right? Trying to convey.
Jerry, do you think either of those, primarily responsible or lead, would pass muster?
I think maybe lead would be okay, but you know, the same for key partners, key parties, key agencies. Yeah, I think we're trying to say the same message. I'm just trying to wordsmith it so I can get it through.
Why don't we, just in interest of time, I know this, even though it's one word, but it sounds like it's important, but I want to be, you know, mindful of the time. I want to maybe, while the council member ponders this a little bit, we want to give an opportunity to the public to really comment on the plan overall. I'll probably limit that to about 20 minutes, if that's okay. And if I can ask the public attendees to go ahead and put in chat, or let Jules know if you are interested to provide public comments at about 2 minutes each, so we kind of can gauge how much time is allotted. And then we'll come back to the council member to deliberate, and then, you know, more feedback before we take a motion on this. So if that's okay with everyone. But if there's some burning question the council member want to ask about what Justin has walked through, please do so in the next couple of minutes.
Yes, if those wishing to make public comment could put their name in the chat box, that would be great.
All right. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and cut over to the public comment period. And I think I saw a couple of ones that were already submitted, and Jewel can go ahead and call the individuals out. Each public comment period is about 2 minutes. I just also wanted to acknowledge the fact that there were many of the public comment that has came in from the last Broadband Council meeting, as well as the email version that came in, have already been incorporated. Notably, two main areas that came across loud and clear was making sure there's recognition to the community and the vendor community that a lot of work has already been done. And that was specifically talked about at the opening session, so that there is acknowledgement going out, so it doesn't look like, you know, we're starting from, you know, square one. Second of all, I think last time it was the citing of the data or the references, make sure that, you know, cite where the sources are, and I believe you all seen those are being addressed. I know there's many more, so I think that is good. To Joe, do we have our first public speaker?
Yes, and I'm not sure, is it Parisa Vincent? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. If you could pronounce it for us, that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you, Jules. It's Parisa Vincent. I'm a Technology Innovation Commissioner for the City of Long Beach and Equity and Inclusion Consultant, but I'm speaking on my own behalf, not my commission. Thank you all. Thank you for your hard work. This is a really tremendous draft. Just some quick notes here. I want to be cognizant of time. One, it would be helpful to have a glossary of terms early on in the draft to help with accessibility of this document for the larger public and who may not be as informed as those on this call. Two, it would be helpful to have some more SMART type of goals or that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, because I'm not not clearly seeing that in this action plan. And if that's not possible at this time, then I strongly recommend to be much more clear around the short-term, near-term, and long-term goals and objectives. And what does that really look like? Because right now, I don't actually, it's not clear to me what these key partners are actually responsible for. Also, I want to commend this group for on page 6 of the draft, and we're talking around footnote 11. The fact that you did bring up the issue of redlining as one of the root causes of the digital inequities. Thank you for doing that. That was one of my comments and other people's comments. However, in the actual commentary, it stated very superficially, and it doesn't specifically say, for example, even in urban areas on this page, it says some communities lack availability. Let's be really clear and very explicit about what we mean. We mean people of communities of color. We mean our Latino, Hispanic, African-American communities, our indigenous population. Let's just be more clear, explicit, and that will help with the equity lens that I know that you all are very committed to bringing to this draft, so thank you on that. And then also under challenges of devices, I think it would be very useful to put a graphic that shows the differences by race and ethnicity. For example, in the city of Long Beach, there are very clear inequities of access to device, and I think it would be very eye-opening for the public and also the commission to make that a little bit more clear. So I think that probably gets to the main points that I have. Thank you very much for hearing my suggestions. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Eli?
Yes, thank you. A great plan. I think it includes...
Can you please announce yourself?
Yes, Eli Cortez, retired state CIO for California. I've been working with a lot of local communities. I think expanding on the local municipal programs where they can implement immediate solutions that are not necessarily going to be broadband, but provide access to the kids that don't have it. And right now, due to COVID-19, all the school districts statewide and probably nationally have experienced dropouts and lower grades because of the lack of the access, and also because the new challenge for online learning. And I think that if you include more of the current COVID-19 problems that are occurring with the school district statewide, you will get more support for the funding. $7 billion or so is a lot of money to ask for, but you need a sense of urgency in this plan, which will then get the attention for the funding that you need.
Thank you. The next person, I don't know what the name associated is. The email address or what's showing up is KAMIPEER. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is Cami Peer. I'm with NextGen California. Just wanted to applaud the Broadband Council's efforts to comply with the Newsom's executive order and to create the State Broadband Action Plan. One of NextGen California's policy and program priorities is to ensure that high-speed, affordable internet service is accessible to all Californians, and this was highlighted in our submitted written comments. As the council works to finalize the action plan, we just want to highlight a few recommendations. So firstly, for infrastructure, deployment must target rural, urban, and tribal areas, and specifically identify historically redlined and underserved areas, as has been brought up before. We see the need to recognize the need to formally advocate for federal actions, such as funding, changes in the E-rate policy program, and the loosening of FCC regulations. As for adoption, we are heartened that the council has recognized the high cost of internet. Educators, families, and even college students should all have access to low-rate plans and be specifically prioritized. And promotion of affordable plans should focus on awareness and accessibilities for these groups. As for support services, we believe educators, families, and college students should also have access to training and technical support to build digital literacy skills. The issue of high-speed universal connectivity has launched to the forefront of policy discussions because of the focus on remote learning, and it's an issue that affects all aspects of our economic and societal well-being. We believe that we must seek partners across all sectors and bring them to the table to help us solve this issue and not simply rely on ISPs to do so. I think we all have a part to play. And this action plan must be broad, strategic, mission-driven, and adequately resourced. The old way of doing things just needs to be ended in order to address an issue that has languished for far too long and continues to exacerbate the inequities across California. So please count NextGen as a resource, and we look forward to working together to achieve a more fair, equitable, and prosperous California. Thank you so much for letting me speak today.
Thank you. Danielle Hughes.
Good morning. This is Danielle Hughes from the Tahoe Transportation District, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate the thought that went into this action plan that you have here. A couple of things I'd like to note on the reliability standards. To consider the seasonal demand of some areas. I know that CPUC has done some testing in some of the park systems, as well as looking at some of the more visitation type areas that are tend to be very rural. However, some of the challenges that we have are those visitation demands. So population data doesn't necessarily correlate with our capacity of our broadband. Also, I recognize the challenges to getting funding for this type of infrastructure, and it really is important to emphasize that smart dig once policy. And I would recommend providing a little bit more guidance to like public works departments on how to go about that with collaborative, approaches with utilities and such. Because I think mapping that out and being prepared for funding is a very critical piece to being successful in doing co-project implementation. Also, the costs, I would say I agree with the comment that was provided earlier. It is exceptionally high in areas such as ours that have granite, have high fire risk, and short construction seasons due to snow. I can give you an example of a 6-mile stretch that we just recently did to bring it into California in Incline Village, which was a $6 million project, and that was just for the conduit. So recognizing that this is expensive, especially when you get out into these rural areas, it is very important to collaborate. I would also recognize that some of these rural areas, you're going to need to coordinate with neighboring states to get it into some of these areas. So making sure that there's an opportunity to do that to make sure that we get it to the boundaries of California as well. So thanks again for having me.
Tom Mullen.
Yes, good morning. And I too want to share my thanks to the council and to the team that put this project together. Not only did you do a great job of bringing all the information together in a clean, understandable document, but you did it openly, quickly, and transparently. Thank you. I would add, I'd submitted some written comments around the data section, and I would reiterate that as we get down to that granularity and that level of accuracy, I believe that we ought to include verbiage that recognizes the address level data that really is required to get there. So I would ask that you look at revising probably item 18 to include some reference to address there on page 27. And then lastly, I too have concern on the overall cost model. I appreciate you sharing that out this morning. I've not yet had an opportunity to walk through that document. I will do so. I will only share that several years ago, we had gone through an ask for broadband services throughout Riverside County through our Rivco Connect project, and our costs that we had received exceeded just for our county, the costs that are being projected for a statewide project. Now I recognize that this may be only for 5 to 3.5% of the state rather than trying to connect new 100%. But those costs do seem relatively low compared to some of the expenses that we saw locally here in Riverside County. With that, again, I thank you all and wish you a happy holiday.
Thank you. And I don't know if Mr. McCarty is with us or Letitia Garcia. It just says from Assemblymember McCarty, Letitia Garcia, Riverside County Office of Education.
Yes, sorry, it's Leticia Garcia with Riverside County Office of Education. I'm just having trouble changing my profile name. But on behalf of Riverside County Office of Education and the 23 public school district superintendents, we appreciate the opportunity to provide public input. The action plan does afford an opportunity to ensure that our students have equitable access to devices and connectivity to access their distance learning. Riverside County districts serve more than 430,000 students, with over 70% of our students qualifying for free and reduced price meals. Since the school closures in March, our districts have worked very hard to make sure that our students have devices and connectivity, partnering with wireless providers to provide discounted rates to our families so our students can have access to their distance learning education. Yet, despite our best efforts, we still have about 10% of our students, or 43,000 of our students, who don't have reliable internet access, obviously impacted their access to learning. So we definitely need a long-term solution. A little bit about Riverside County. Our county spans over 7,300 miles. Much of it is mountainous and remote desert areas, lacking the infrastructure to provide reliable internet connectivity to our students. So the draft plan does articulate the core challenges and lists of actions. We do ask, however, that the plan include the requirement that telecommunication companies provide or create an inventory of areas that are served, underserved, and not served, and to demonstrate progress towards serving all those areas within the 12-month period of the action plan. Without the opportunity to monitor progress, we will not know the real impact of the action plan in eradicating the digital divide, which is our common goal. Again, thank you for the opportunity to provide public input, and we look forward to working in collaboration to achieve our common goal.
Thank you. Rochelle Swanson.
Hi, thank you. I want to start by again recognizing all the hard work you guys have done. It's really quite incredible what's happened in this time frame, and appreciate that while deployment wasn't listed as a core roadblock, it's clear throughout the document that you're recognizing that the permitting process is a barrier in many areas, and it's something to be able to be addressed for deployment, because no matter how much we invest in focusing on the state level and public areas, there's a lot of private investment out there that we could be deploying to really start reaching that 98% goal. So I have a couple of recommendations, specifically in number 6 on page 22. Again, great, and I have a lot of confidence in Department of Technology in working with local governments. Words matter, and I think enhance sounds like broaden or add more. I would like to recommend a better word than enhance would be either bolster to make it better, or to be very clear, the issue we have, which would be using the word improve. Another thing I would like to recommend to that, to mitigate unintended consequences, is to either include language within that paragraph, or maybe add a little more language around responsible. My concern is that maybe improvements and changes don't get made, because I think if we're waiting for biannual meetings or even quarterly meetings, we may not see specific, really genuine changes for another couple of years out. And that's unfortunate, that we potentially are delaying even further being able to move, when I think we've all can recognize that a big part of the barriers is the fact that your zip code can often define your level of access and availability, simply because of some of the local permitting that is often not in alignment with federal rules, and even in some areas state rules. So I would like to see if maybe could do that is, and that's I think where maybe the word enhance comes in, is to enhance existing efforts. So I wouldn't want there to be the unintended consequence that perhaps, you know, it would change the recognition that there's opportunities for the state to lead in ways that show more ubiquitous deployment happening because there's consistency across different cities and counties, so that community members can come online and be able to do that. But again, thank you for what you've done. It's been an amazing effort that you've done in a short amount of time. And as always, Crown Castle is here to provide any information, support, and any technical advice at all. So happy holidays and thank you again.
Thank you. And I just want to remind people when they're making public comment today, the public comment is about this, the draft put before you today. It is not, you know, other things. Viviana Martin Gonzalez.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the action plan. I'm Viviana Martin, a policy analyst with Unidos US, previously known as the National Council of La Raza. We're the nation's largest Hispanic civil rights and advocacy organization. Through our unique combination of research, advocacy programs, and affiliate network, we challenge the social, economic, and political barriers at both the national and state level. And Unidos US strongly supports this plan and appreciates all the time and effort that was put into its creation. So thank you so much for your work. However, before the plan is finalized, we urge you to explicitly incorporate Latinos into the more explicitly incorporate Latinos into the action plan. Latinos comprise the largest population group in California, and 80% of Latinos are classified as socioeconomically disadvantaged. This is critical as one's income is a large indicator of technological knowledge and access to broadband and devices. Furthermore, it is estimated that roughly 35% of Latino students are still without broadband. Given this context, we have the following recommendations. The first being, given the impacts of the digital divide on California's Latino student population, Latino should be explicitly mentioned in the action plan to ensure that this hard-hit population has immediate access to necessary targeted resources and culturally responsive initiatives to meaningfully participate in remote learning. Second, better detailed data is necessary in order to identify which communities are disproportionately affected and to better target resources. And that is mentioned in the plan. However, it is critical that the data is disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and income to illustrate where the gaps in access exist and still persist. Lastly, Unidos US strongly advocates for comprehensive and robust resources to mitigate the impacts of the digital divide. And we can only accomplish this by highlighting the impact on Latinos informed by disaggregated data. Thank you for your time and consideration and for all of your work.
Thank you. Abby Ridley-Kerr.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. My name is Abby Ridley-Kerr, and I'm a research and data analyst with the Education Trust West, a nonprofit educational equity organization focused on educational justice and closing achievement and opportunity gaps through research, data, policy analysis, and advocacy. And I'm here today in partnership with the UC Student Association, Cal State Student Association, and Student Senate for California Community Colleges. And on behalf of students, parents, educators, and community stakeholders deeply affected by the digital divide, I'd like to thank the Council for its efforts on this plan to expand broadband access to all Californians. As we continue to live in the reality of COVID-19, it's important to have all voices of students, families, and education equity advocates and higher education partners represented in the public comments. Without those voices, we would be leaving the most important stakeholders out of the conversation. I'd like to highlight just a few recommendations that I've seen elevated in the plan and echo those perspectives from our students across the state around improving access, affordability, and reliability of broadband connectivity by increasing marketing and accessibility of reduced cost and free broadband access programs, and developing low-cost metrics for post-secondary students such as Cal Grant, Pell, and California Dream Act eligibility, suspending the caps on upload and download speed with reduced cost and free broadband access programs, establishing a symmetrical upload and download speed of 100 megabytes per household, expanding coverage within rural, tribal, and unserved communities to prevent redlining, secure immediate and on-campus public accessibility through Wi-Fi integrated parking lots, safe on-campus learning centers, and cell wheels, and promoting data transparency for internet service providers and broadband companies on usage and marketing of their reduced cost and free programs. thank you so much for your time today, for all the work you've done, and for keeping equity front and center as you finalize this plan.
Thank you. Tom West.
My name is Tom West. I represent the North Bay North Coast Broadband Consortium. Thank you for the solid piece of work and the launch of this action plan. We hope that it will spur us to solve the digital divide issue. I have 4 points. Question one is there a reason there are no dollars talked about in the execution of this plan? 2, I do not see any significant reference to counties, and they are the real key to opening up rural California. The last time I recommended in each county develop a strategic plan that would be part of this action plan. Third, I wonder if the CPUC would host a workshop on the cost model. I agree with the comments that were made earlier by Mullen and Hughes that the estimate of 6.8 billion seems significantly low. And finally, I want to urge this group to make sure that we do not have a top-down approach going forward. I think the sessions were excellent, but we need to make sure that bodies out in the community are deeply involved in the next evolution of this plan. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. There was one more person, but they said they wanted to speak about what they do, and the purpose of this public comment is for the action plan. So I'll hand it over to Amy.
Great, thank you, Jules. Thank you so much for all of the wonderful comments. And in fact, you know, I know everybody's taking, you know, notes, as these are very, very good input. I'm actually going to call back up Justin and Stephanie, maybe to provide a very quick recap. And this is really test the ability of, you know, all these comments that are being captured. Maybe a very brief summary or recap of good suggestions that potentially will make it into the broadband action plan. And then we're gonna, actually, I think there's no more speakers. So why don't we go ahead and close the public comment so that Justin and Stephanie can give a brief recap. And then I wanted to make sure we go back to the council member to deliberate through this plan with the goal of, one, to identify whether there are some fatal flaws in the plan that is preventing it from being adopted. Second of all, that also under the context of that, this is a broadband action plan, knowing it's a living document that in the beginning of the new year, that there's going to be specific, such as, you know, timeline and details going to be added and associated to it, so that so it's not like a plan that it's done is going to be shelved. It's going to be actively worked on as the guiding principle and direction of what this needs to be done. And then once we have the council member have had a chance to deliberate through, and if the plan gets adopted, I do want to have a few minutes at the end to actually have a request of all our public participants, with many of you representing so many organizations and large network of communication. We are going to ask you to help the council member to amplify this plan by sharing it out and presenting it. And that goes back to if there's follow-up workshop or a webinar needs to be conducted on the plan, we wanted to actually hear to see what would be some of the best way to communicate this out. So that's kind of what our plan is for the remaining 30 minutes. With that, Justin and Stephanie.
I will do my best here, and we will undoubtedly miss pieces of this, and so for that I apologize, and we'll say, Stephanie, I will try to make sure that we capture the high points of what the comments that were specific that we might be able to think about incorporating within the action plan. So I'm going to go through my list quickly, and then Stephanie will fill in any of the gaps that she noticed that I missed. So first one on page 6, calling out specific types of urban communities that lack access. That was in the green lining section. So calling out specific communities of color in urban areas. 2 is talk about in some of the data sections around service, the visitation shifts. Thought that was an interesting point that hadn't come up in public comment before. 3rd is in the dig once policy, and as we're thinking about this sort of technical assistance that we're providing to local governments, providing guidance to public works departments about how to implement a dig once policy in their local areas. Next is, there was a lot of discussion both in the chat and in public comment around the cost model as a potential underestimate. And so explicitly making reference to that in the document. Coordinating with neighboring states in the context of deployment to edge pieces of our state. There were a couple comments around the data that we use, particularly about saying, the specific data that, we refer to the granularity. The EG that people wanted to include was address level data. In addition, making sure that we're getting updated data on a regular basis across the levels of service to ensure that we're making progress. Comment around on page 22 in the permitting discussion, in sort of expanding enhance to also enhance and improve permitting, and talking about some of the urgency around the timing of the way that we're doing that convening to not just run semi-annually, but potentially running more frequently. On the data, also disaggregating more clearly by race. And that, that was an interesting comment because we do have a bunch of data that we synthesized into a graphic early on in the report. And I think that there's an opportunity to potentially have an appendix that more clearly shows some of the existing data as well for public reference. Incorporating a table, like a glossary of terms at the beginning to help the public understand what we're talking about when it comes to some of the elements within the report. Involving local governments more directly in the work going forward. And then there is there was a request around having a workshop on the CPUC cost model going forward. And then the other piece, which I think might require additional conversation, is federal advocacy and asking for explicit changes within FCC policy and some of the existing programs. Stephanie, what did I miss?
I hope you can hear me okay. Actually, you did a great job. A couple other things that either in public chat or mentioned is, if you didn't already, is specifically around making the goals much more specific around SMART goals. And naturally, we've had a lot of conversation around that. We can revisit that, or that actually might be more appropriate for future plans as we move forward. Another area is, I know there's a specific recommendation about using the word enhance and a suggestion to use bolster. So of course, that's something that we could take a look at. And the other two were an actual suggestion around or question why additional state funding wasn't specifically mentioned that we should consider. And then a couple others were, or the last one that I have on my list was specifically to add in tribes in the narrative. Just to call out, of course, the focus that we have on tribes, and that came from Kelly Stevenson.
Right.
Naturally, sorry, really quick, what we'll do is we'll also go through all the public comments. Sorry, Amy, just so everybody knows, because I know that was our kind of a quick quiz for us to make sure that we heard you, but we do go through all the recorded public comment, and we'll make sure to do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie and Justin. That was a excellent job on the on the recapping in this very, very fast kind of like a feedback session. So with that, let's go to the council member. Council member, you have heard about all of the public comments. You've been working so closely with the staff in the past, gosh, I can't even count how many months, especially in this pandemic time, to provide good feedback. I do wanted to call out specifically, for the additional help from Store Drone and then also Ann. and then as well as our contracted writer, research firm CTC, and Sarah with all of the help you all provided. So you have this product, now it's in front of you. I wanted to open it up to get your thoughts, specifically on whether there are any fatal flaws, if there are any major sections that needs to be, inserted or modified or corrected in preventing it from being, adopted today. And knowing that there's still going to be work between now and end of the month to do more polishing and editing based on the feedback we have additionally heard today. And so that's the context. And then in addition to that, there is going to be a joint letter by the Broadband Council member with your e-signature in presenting this plan to not only the governor's office, because this was in response to the executive order, but also to the public who have spent so much time with us in this process and providing their valuable feedback. So we want to go through that. And so with that type of setting, let's open it up.
Angela Williams with Assemblymember Gibson's office. Just wanted to thank staff, members, and also public comment, particularly on the document. It's excellent. It provides a broad atmosphere, I'll put it that way, that could create the conditions for broadband for all. So amazing work, particularly the mentions related to the digital divide, related to redlining, related to the origins of some of the segregation of the past, that if we're not obviously clear and specific, if we don't bring it up, if we don't name it, we'll continue. So extreme kudos in terms of the writing, particularly focusing on redlining. Of course, it's in the 64th Assembly District, like many Assembly districts in both urban and rural areas, that the connectivity is no longer obviously an appendage or a one-off. It's a necessity, it's a utility. So I wanted to provide at least two notes around what I think is important. I think because it is a statement that is broad, I think there may be room for conversations around, and I'll loosely characterize this as values, right? So many of you have heard the argumentation around the internet being utility. And I think we're at that stage now, particularly with COVID. COVID has turned over a new leaf for all of us, and we know this is a necessity. And so, of course, lifeline services, at the telecom level are important, but really looking at how to, and this may happen in implementation. So again, another broad comment. But the thrust of what we're looking at, I think, in terms of implementation in both urban and rural communities is, dare I say, a right to this access. The second thing I'll say is I do appreciate the focus on schools, libraries. I think those are vitally important. But as we know, again, a vestige of segregation is the lack of institutions. And so in Assemblymember Gibson's district, and this is something that I've talked to commissioners about, to as well as Mr. Gibson, the CPUC president, also CPUC government relations folks, and any staff that will continue to listen to me. We have a major situation with an organization in Watts that was kicked out of the Teleconnect Fund. And we are hopeful and inspired by Mr. Gibson's meeting with President Battinger that we'll have some sort of legislative fix in terms of looking at the overall qualifications related to nonprofit organizations. I mention that because nonprofit organizations are not called out. And while it is important to think through and vital to think through schools and libraries, in low income and poor communities, what fills the void are nonprofit organizations. And I think we need to call that out. I think we need to be very specific that nonprofit organizations are a part of the infrastructure. And if they're a part of the infrastructure, at the end of the day, they provide access for many people that don't have access at home. And because they're a nexus for all kinds of services, it serves as a one-stop shop, right? And I think that, you know, at the end of the day is extremely important in terms of implementation, right? Because if we don't include in a very deliberate way nonprofit organizations, then we are going to not be able to claim the victory, which we want, of having broadband for all.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Other council member?
I don't want to be the stick in the mud, you know. I do want to thank everyone for all the work that was put into this document. It's very impressive and just a great action plan all around. But again, the word responsible for the Department of Ed is a fatal flaw for us. We need something to say key parties, key partners, for us to be able to sign off.
Okay, noted. Others?
Can I add just in response to Dr. Williams, if there are places, are there any places where you feel like libraries and schools or are mentioned, but nonprofits or CBOs aren't, and really needs to be highlighted, or the order needs to be changed? And I'm asking mainly because you know, when we were looking through, you know, through these, I think, you know, we tried to include the word nonprofit quite a bit. I mean, and, you know, especially thinking about technology access in communities. I mean, that's where so much of it happens, and very much to your point that there are not always those, you know, the institutions are both, they're nonprofit and government institutions that are the ones providing access in communities, and they're both equally important. So I wonder if there is any place where you feel it's really widely missing, because I think we want to, I'd really want to make sure we correct that.
I think, great question. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your partnership. I really enjoyed working with you before paternity leave. And of course, all of you probably know, my wife and I had a son, and thank you for all of the well wishes, greatly appreciated. I think everywhere we see in the document, libraries and schools, it should be nonprofits and CBOs. And I think that'll be a quick fix in terms of, right? Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. And I think I completely agree with that. And I think that's something that's pretty easy to go in and do.
Yeah. And I think this follow up to what Jerry mentioned, I think these are the things we can say, whoever is going to make the motion. If we're going to get to the point, ready to make the motion, it could be with the understanding that, for example, you know, responsible to be replaced by a word that I think, you know, if that's a key stakeholder, key partner, as well as to Dr. Williams, with the modification that nonprofit will be inserted to wherever, you know, state, library, and business. You know, we can make that kind of thing as part of the motion. Any other comments from the council member, please?
Yes, I do.